So I want you to picture this. It's the summer of 2018, and Europe is just baking in this massive compounding drought.
Yeah, it was absolutely brutal.
Right. The heat was awful. But the real crisis, like the actual emergency, wasn't just the temperature itself. It was what happened to the water.
Exactly. A major artery of European trade and survival just dropped to these historically low levels.
I mean, we're talking massive cargo ships carrying steel, grain, chemicals, all just grinding to an absolute halt, physically stuck on exposed gravel bars.
And it wasn't just shipping. Major power plants couldn't draw enough cold water to cool their reactors.
Wait, because if they did, they'd essentially be dumping boiling water back into a shallow river, right?
Yes, they would literally cook the river, so they had to heavily throttle down their energy output.
So you've got supply chains fracturing, energy grids straining, millions of fish suffocating in these oxygen-starved shallows. And all of this cascading chaos happened because of one single, fragile, highly engineered blue line on a map.
It is wild when you put it like that.
It really is. And that's exactly what we are decoding today. We are doing a deep dive into the Danube River.
And honestly, that 2018 crisis is the perfect starting point, because it completely shatters the illusion we all kind of grew up with.
You mean just looking at rivers as geographic trivia?
Right. We're taught to look at maps and see rivers as static borders, but from a systems perspective, a river is not a line. It is a massive mechanism of energy transfer.
Okay, unpack that a little. Energy transfer.
Yeah, it moves kinetic energy, sediment, chemical nutrients, and economic momentum. And the Danube is arguably the most complex energy transfer system on the entire planet.
Which is exactly why we aren't here for a standard high school geography lesson. Our mission for this deep dive is to dissect the Danube from all our source materials today.
And we have a huge stack of sources, everything from hydrological data to geopolitical risk assessments.
Exactly. We want to look at it as a living machine, an economic engine, and a geopolitical battleground. I mean, we're dealing with a river that flows through 10 sovereign nations.
Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia.
Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, and Ukraine.
Right. That is more countries than literally any other river in the world.
And it's huge, right? Europe's second longest river.
Yeah, after the Volga. It stretches about 2,850 kilometers from the Black Forest in Germany all the way down to the Black Sea.
And reading through these sources, the central thesis that keeps popping up is this idea of control.
Yes. Whoever controls the flow of that energy, whether that's through concrete dams, political treaties, or shipping regulations, ultimately controls the wealth and survival of the entire region.
But to really grasp the physics and the politics of how 10 modern nations fight over this water today, we can't just jump straight into the modern era.
No, you need a baseline. You can't just look at the heavily dredged, concrete-lined shipping channel we have right now.
Right. We have to look at what hydrologists call the fluvial geomorphology, basically what this river was before human engineering decided to step in. So let's rewind the clock to the early Holocene.
Right after the last ice age.
Exactly. 10,000 years ago.
Well, if you look at the geological records from back then, the Danube wouldn't even be recognizable to you.
Really? Like totally different shape?
Completely. It didn't sit in a neat single channel like we see today. It was what our sources describe as a braided river system.
A braided river system. Okay, so what does that actually look like?
Depending on the season and the glacial melt, it was this sprawling, chaotic network, just shifting channels, temporary islands, massive alluvial floodplains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and dense wetlands that could stretch miles across.
So it was essentially a constantly moving physical force. The topography itself was just fluid.
Highly fluid. The kinetic energy of the water was constantly carving new paths. It would deposit massive amounts of gravel and silt and then tear down the very banks it had built the year before.
So for thousands of years, the river was like a wild animal that early civilizations just had to respect and tiptoe around.
That's a great analogy. The archaeological evidence from the sources shows that early populations had to be deeply adaptive.
They couldn't just build a permanent wall.
No, they moved with the fish migrations. They planted their crops in the fresh silt left behind by the seasonal floods.
And they retreated when the water swelled.
Exactly. The river dictated the absolute boundaries of human ambition, not the other way around.
Okay, let's unpack this pivot then, because I always find that transition fascinating. The moment humanity decides to stop reacting to nature and starts trying to put a saddle on it.
Right, when we decided to exploit it.
And with the Danube, The sources pinpoint that pivot really crystallizing during the Roman Empire. They didn't just build a few fishing docks.
No, they integrated the entire river into an imperial machine. The Romans turned the Danube into the limes, the northern frontier of their empire.
But the sources are quick to point out that viewing it purely as a defensive border kind of misses the genius of it.
It absolutely does. It was a logistical masterpiece. Think about it. Moving a ton of grain or timber over land in a wooden cart back then was incredibly slow.
And mathematically inefficient, right,
Yeah.
because of the friction of the dirt roads.
Exactly. But moving that exact same tonnage by barge down the Danube required a fraction of the caloric and financial energy. The Romans basically recognized the river as an asymmetric logistical advantage.
It became this massive conveyor belt for empire building, but it's not a uniform conveyor belt, is it?
Not at all.
Because the geography of the river actually forged three really distinct geopolitical zones. And the sources argue you can still see the scars of that development today. Let's break those down, maybe starting at the headwaters.
Sure. Geomorphology dictates human development. So the upper Danube, this is flowing from Germany down through Austria, is defined by a really steep gradient,
Meaning the water moves fast.
fast and powerful. Historically, that kinetic energy was easily harnessed for water wheels and early milling.
Which laid the foundation for early industrialization in that specific region.
Right. And today, this zone is characterized by immense wealth, rigid infrastructure, high-tech agriculture, and near-total engineering control over the water flow.
Okay, then the gradient drops and the river hits the middle Danube.
Yeah, from Slovakia and Hungary down through Serbia. Here, the river enters the Pannonian Basin. Because the land flattens out, the water slows down dramatically.
And it drops all that sediment it was carrying.
Exactly, which creates these incredibly fertile, massive agricultural plains.
But geopolitically, flat, fertile plains are practically indefensible.
They are a nightmare to defend. There are no mountain ranges to hide behind. So this made the Middle Danube the ultimate historical meat grinder.
Right. The sources list them all. Huns, Avars, Ottomans, Habsburgs.
They all just used these flat plains as a corridor for invasion. It is basically the perennial contested zone of Europe.
Wow. Which leaves the lower Danube, starting from the Iron Gates Gorge between Serbia and Romania, going all the way out to the Black Sea.
And the lower Danube has historically been the frontier. It has a much wider floodplain, and it's far less rigidly industrialized than the German and Austrian sections.
And it terminates in this massive delta.
The immense Danube Delta. This is basically the ecological kidney of the entire system. It's a massive wetland that filters the water before it finally hits the ocean.
So imagine you're taking a boat down this route today. You aren't just crossing borders, you're traversing thousands of years of socioeconomic divergence.
Yeah, the languages shift from Germanic to Slavic to Romance.
And the food and culture radically transformed downstream, all forced to interact by this single corridor. You go from heavily capitalized German infrastructure through the historical battlefields of Hungary down into the raw, ecological Romanian wetlands.
It's a journey through time, really.
But here's the thing. The modern assumption is that because we have all this advanced technology now, we've somehow conquered these historical divisions, right? Like we've mastered the river.
What's fascinating here is that that is the ultimate illusion of control.
An illusion.
Completely. We look at the concrete embankments in Vienna
Mm-hmm.
or the massive locks in Bavaria,
Yeah.
and we just assume stability. We think we've won.
Because it looks so permanent.
Right. But treating a dynamic, living hydrological system like a sterile concrete highway requires a level of continuous, forceful intervention that is mathematically unsustainable over the long term. We are constantly fighting the river.
Let's dig into the physics of that intervention then, because the scale of the engineering outlined in these blueprints is staggering. Let's talk about the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal.
Oh, that is a wild project.
We literally blasted a trench through the European watershed divide to connect the North Sea to the Black Sea. I mean, you can put a massive cargo barge in Rotterdam and float it all the way to Romania.
The engineering required to achieve that is phenomenal. You were talking about a system of 16 massive locks just on the canal itself.
And a lock is essentially a water elevator, right?
Exactly. Because the canal has to cross the continental divide, ships actually have to be lifted up over the mountains.
Wait, so massive pumps have to push millions of gallons of water uphill against gravity?
Yes, uphill against gravity, just to fill these locks, lift the ship up, and then carefully lower it down the other side into the Danube Basin.
Okay, but hold on. If we are pumping water from the Rhine Basin over a mountain range and dropping it into the Danube Basin, We aren't just moving ships. We are physically mixing two completely separate evolutionary ecosystems.
Precisely. You've created an artificial biological bridge.
That sounds like an ecological disaster waiting to happen.
And it kind of is. We've seen a massive influx of invasive species, crustaceans, mollusks, and fish species from the Ponto-Caspian region.
It's just hitching a ride.
Yeah, riding the hulls and ballast water of these ships right into the heart of Western Europe, which is devastating local food webs.
But the sources point out that the ecological disruption goes way deeper than just invasive species. To make the river suitable for these massive, standardized cargo ships, engineers had to fundamentally alter the fluid dynamics of the Danube itself.
Yes, through a process called channelization.
Which basically means straightening the river, cutting off all those ancient meandering loops so the ships can drive in a straight, efficient line.
Right. But when you look at the physics of it, specifically something called Manning's equation, which hydrologists use to calculate water velocity, when you cut out a meander and make a river straight, you are artificially increasing the slope.
Because the water has a shorter distance to drop the exact same amount of elevation,
Exactly.
so the water speeds up.
Drastically. And faster water has exponentially more erosive power. So a straightened river begins to aggressively scour its own bed. It starts digging itself deeper and deeper into the earth.
Wow.
And as the riverbed drops, it physically pulls the surrounding groundwater table down with it.
Oh, I see. So the agricultural fields bordering the river suddenly find their wells running completely dry.
Yes.
Yes.
Because the engineered river is literally draining the landscape around it.
And to stop the river from tearing apart its banks with all this new kinetic energy, we just pour millions of tons of riprap boulders and concrete along the edges. We basically turn a living ecosystem into a sterile pipe.
A sterile pipe that is then punctuated by massive blockages. Because if channelization speeds the river up, hydroelectric dams bring it to a violent halt.
Like the Iron Gates dams on the Serbian-Romanian border.
That's a prime example. I mean, they are engineering marvels that provide a massive percentage of the region's renewable energy.
I want to push back on the marvels label, though, reading what the sources say about the biological toll. It sounds brutal. I'm thinking specifically about the beluga sturgeon.
The sturgeon are a tragedy.
These are massive, ancient fish. The source material says some can live over a century and grow to the size of a small car.
Yeah, they are incredible creatures. And they are anadromous, which means they live in the salt water of the Black Sea. But they have to migrate hundreds of miles up the fresh water of the Danube to find specific gravel beds to spawn.
And a dam is literally a 100-foot wall of solid concrete in their living room.
Exactly. The Iron Gates dams physically severed the evolutionary migration routes of the sturgeon. Their populations have completely crashed.
It's just a dead end for them.
But the dam doesn't just block biological matter like fish. It blocks geological matter.
Sediment.
Right. For millennia, the Danube has acted as this conveyor belt, carrying millions of tons of sand, silt, and gravel from the Alps and the Carpathians all the way down to the Black Sea.
And this sediment naturally replenished the riverbanks and built the Danube Delta, right?
Yes. But a dam halts that entire flow. So the reservoir behind the Iron Gates is just slowly filling up with millions of tons of trapped sediment.
Wait, so what happens to the river downstream of the dam if it's suddenly starved of all that dirt and gravel? Does it just run clear?
It runs clear, but hydrologists call it hungry water.
Hungry water.
Yeah. Because the water leaving the dam's turbines has been stripped of its natural sediment load, it actually has excess kinetic energy. To regain its natural equilibrium, that clean, fast-moving water violently attacks the riverbed downstream.
It's trying to pick up new sediment.
Exactly. It scours the foundations of bridges, it undercuts the flood protection levees, and all the way out at the Black Sea, the Danube Delta is slowly washing away into the ocean because it is no longer being replenished.
Which brings us perfectly to the levees. Because we've sped the river up and starved it of sediment, we now have to build massive earthen and concrete walls along the banks to protect all the cities and farms that were built on the old floodplains.
It's a vicious cycle of engineering.
But wait, if we constrain a river with levees so it can't flood naturally, aren't we just stripping the system of its natural shock absorbers? Are we actually managing the river or just constantly correcting our own interventions?
We are essentially building a hydrological pressure cooker. Historically, a natural floodplain acts as a release valve. When heavy rains hit, the river slowly spreads out over miles of wetlands.
So it absorbs the volume and dissipates the energy harmlessly.
Right. But when you wall off the river with levees, that volume of water has nowhere to go but up.
And it's trapped in that straightened concrete channel we talked about, meaning it's moving incredibly fast.
Exactly. So when a modern flood exceeds the design capacity of the levees, it isn't a slow, seasonal rising of waters. It is a catastrophic, high-velocity blowout.
The water just breaches the wall.
It breaches the wall and aggressively destroys all the infrastructure built behind it. We haven't actually eliminated the risk of flooding. We have simply postponed it.
While guaranteeing that when a failure does happen, it will be absolutely devastating.
Yes. And this creates what systems engineers call a tightly coupled system. There is literally no slack left.
Okay, let's map this out using the 2018 crisis, because the mechanics of a cascading failure in a tightly coupled system are terrifying. It starts with something as simple as a low snowpack in the Alps.
Right. Less snow over the winter means less spring meltwater. So by summer, a regional drought hits, and the base flow of the Danube drops significantly.
So immediately the water level is too shallow for the heavy cargo ships. They either have to run at a quarter capacity, completely destroying their profit margins, or they stop completely.
Which is a massive supply chain bottleneck hitting 10 countries all at once.
But the collapse compounds from there.
Because the water volume is drastically lower, the ambient summer heat warms the river up much faster. And mathematically, warmer water holds less dissolved oxygen.
So the aquatic ecosystem is literally suffocating.
Yes. But simultaneously, the industrial reality kicks in. Major power plants along the Danube rely on the river for cooling their reactors or coal turbines.
They pull cold water in and discharge warmer water back out.
Exactly.
Wait, if the river is already at critically low levels and historically high temperatures, and a nuclear or coal plant dumps millions of gallons of hot water back into it.
It would literally push the river beyond the thermal limits of biological survival. It would cook everything. So the environmental regulators are forced to step in and make the power plants throttle down or shut off entirely.
Let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly based on the reports. A lack of rain in the Alps triggers a shipping halt. That stops coal and raw materials from moving, which happens at the exact same time the power grid has to be throttled down due to thermal limits, right when millions of people are turning on their air conditioning because of the heat wave.
You've got it. And while all of this is happening, the agricultural and industrial pollutants that are normally safely diluted by massive river volumes are now highly concentrated in a shrinking, suffocating body of water.
Leading to those massive toxic algae blooms and fish die-offs the sources mentioned.
Exactly.
That is absolutely terrifying. It's a system where every single efficiency metric we've engineered is intimately tied to a potential point of catastrophic failure.
Yes, there's zero room for error.
And because we've tied 10 sovereign nations to this exact same pressure cooker, the politics of this become intensely frictional. I mean, who actually controls the levers when the system starts breaking down?
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where hydrology dictates geopolitics. The defining reality of the Danube is hydropolitical asymmetry.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, in international water law, power flows in the exact opposite direction of the water.
Oh, because gravity favors the upstream nations. Germany and Austria are sitting at the top of the watershed.
Exactly. They possess inherent structural supremacy. An upstream nation controls the tap. They decide how much water gets held back in their reservoirs and how much gets released.
And downstream just has to deal with it.
Furthermore, any industrial runoff, chemical spills, or agricultural nitrates that upstream nations introduce into the water simply flows away from them. Gravity literally cleanses their jurisdiction.
Wow. I was trying to visualize this asymmetry from the risk assessment documents, and it reminds me of a cascading corporate supply chain.
How so?
Imagine a massive factory floor. Germany and Austria are the executives at the very start of the assembly line. They dictate the speed of the belt, the quality of the raw materials, and the schedule.
Okay, I see where you're going.
By the time the product, or in this case the water, reaches the workers at the very end of the line, places like Romania or Bulgaria, those workers have zero control over what they're handed. They just have to scramble to manage the reduced flow, the accumulated pollution from 8 other countries, and the ecological degradation of the delta. They share the building, but the penthouse controls the plumbing.
That is an incredibly accurate structural comparison. The downstream nations are fundamentally captive to the policy decisions of the upstream nations. Now, to be fair, there have been attempts to mitigate this.
The Danube Commission, right?
Yes. Established by the Belgrade Convention in 1948, it is the primarily international body trying to coordinate this mess and manage it impartially.
But looking at the history of the Danube Commission in our sources, its primary mandate was never really about ecological fairness, was it? It was established primarily to guarantee free navigation.
Precisely. It's about keeping the cargo ships moving. It was a treaty born out of the Cold War, designed to ensure that commerce could survive the Iron Curtain.
So it's an economic treaty, not an environmental one.
Well, newer frameworks, like the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube River, do try to address water quality and ecology. But you cannot legislate away gravity. The structural inequality is baked in. The upstream nations will always have the leverage of physical control.
And it's vital to point out from the reports that this asymmetry isn't just international, it happens domestically.
Oh, absolutely.
Even within a single country like Hungary or Serbia, the allocation of water during a drought heavily favors the entities with the most political capital.
The capital cities get the multi-billion-euro flood walls and the guaranteed municipal water flow. The massive corporate agricultural conglomerates get the permits to divert water for industrial irrigation.
While the rural communities, the traditional fishermen, and the small-scale farmers basically get the scraps.
They do. They are the ones living in the designated flood bypass zones. They are expected to take the hit to save the urban centers.
So it is a controlled imbalance. The modern engineered river is optimized for aggregate economic output, not for localized equity.
It's optimized for the spreadsheet, not the people.
Which perfectly transitions us from the macro-level geopolitics down to the micro-level reality. Because, it's easy for us to sit here and analyze the river as a thermodynamic system or a treaty dispute, but there are millions of people who wake up, step outside, and physically interact with this water every single day.
And the way they experience the Danube is wildly fragmented depending on where they sit in that hierarchy.
Right. What does the river actually mean to them?
The lived experience of the river is essentially a study in cognitive dissonance. Consider a traditional commercial fisherman in the lower Danube.
Okay.
For generations, his family's economic survival was synchronized with the natural pulse of the river. He knew the seasons, the floods, the fish runs.
But today, according to the cultural histories we read, that fisherman is a victim of shifting baseline syndrome.
Exactly. He goes out in the freezing pre-dawn fog, fighting a current that's been altered by dams hundreds of miles away.
He's trying to catch fish whose spawning grounds no longer even exist.
And he is intimately aware of the bioaccumulation of heavy metals in his catch. He experiences the river as a damaged, highly unpredictable provider.
Contrast that with the farmer on the Hungarian plains. He relies on the river just as much, but his relationship is intensely adversarial.
He is constantly checking the weather upstream in Austria.
Right. He desperately needs the seasonal timing for irrigation water, but he knows that if a major storm hits the Alps, the straightened, leveed river channel is going to fire a massive surge of water straight at his fields. He lives in a constant state of managed anxiety.
And then you have the urbanite in Vienna or Budapest. Let's look at Vienna specifically. Have you seen the Don Winsel?
The Danube Island?
Yeah. It's a massive 21-kilometer-long artificial island right in the middle of the river.
The sources say it is a phenomenal piece of engineering. It functions as a massive flood relief channel to protect the city.
It does. But for the average citizen in Vienna, it's just a beautiful recreation area.
Right. They go jogging there. They go to cafes. They watch the city lights reflect on the water at night. For the urban resident, the river has been completely sanitized. It is purely an aesthetic, lighted backdrop.
The concrete walls, the municipal water treatment plants, hydroelectric grids, they're all so seamlessly integrated that the resident is completely insulated from the raw, violent power of the river.
That insulation is the ultimate luxury of modern engineering. But beneath that sterilized concrete reality, there is this invisible, deeply embedded layer of cultural and spiritual history.
There is. For thousands of years, humans didn't just use the Danube, they revered it.
This is where the psychology of our relationship with the water really gets exposed in the sources. Because unlike the Ganges in India, which is overtly worshipped as a singular, unified deity, the Danube's spiritual footprint is much more fragmented, but arguably just as profound.
Oh, for sure. Think about the Romans again. Standing on the southern bank looking north, the river wasn't just a military border to them, it was an ontological threshold.
An ontological threshold, like a boundary of reality.
Yes, it was the absolute edge between order, law, and civilization, and the dark, chaotic, unfathomable wilderness of the quote-unquote barbarians. To cross the Danube was to step out of the known universe.
Wow. And as the Roman era faded and Christianity swept across the continent, the physical water of the river was heavily integrated into the spiritual architecture of Europe. You see massive monasteries and churches built deliberately right on its banks.
The water itself becomes a symbol of purification. It served as the medium for centuries of Christian baptismal rites. Water, chemically, is the universal solvent, and spiritually it became the solvent for sin and passage.
But it wasn't all high-minded theology either. The local folklore, particularly in the Slavic regions of the Middle and Lower Danube, is incredibly dark.
Yes, the water spirits.
Right, because local fishermen didn't have fluid dynamics to explain why a sudden eddy would pull a boat under or why a flash flood would annihilate a whole village, so they personified the river.
They created myths of water spirits and superstitions, entities that required appeasement. They respected the river because they believed it had intent. It could generously give life, but it could maliciously take it away.
And the fascinating thing is that even as we industrialized, we continued to mythologize the river just in a different way. Look at Johann Strauss's famous waltz, The Blue Danube.
Oh, everyone knows that melody.
Ugh.
It is the ultimate sonic representation of European elegance.
Yes, but context is everything here. The cultural histories note that Strauss composed that piece in 1867, right after the Austrian Empire had suffered a humiliating military defeat by Prussia. The empire was fracturing.
So the waltz was essentially psychological propaganda.
Exactly. It reimagined the Danube, which in reality was a gritty, muddy, turbulent, heavily engineered commercial waterway, as this serene, unifying, beautiful blue thread connecting the empire. It was a collective myth of stability to mask the reality.
That brings up a philosophical question that I think is the very core of this deep dive.
Okay, what is it?
When we strip away all of that mysticism, when we stop fearing the water spirits, when we stop viewing the river as a divine threshold, and we just reduce it to a spreadsheet of flow rates, megawatts, and shipping routes, does that loss of spiritual friction make it psychologically easier for us to exploit it?
Does stripping the meaning away make us more extractive?
Yes.
I mean, looking at the state of the river today, the answer has to be yes. When you decouple a natural system from moral or spiritual meaning, it just becomes a resource to be optimized.
If the river is sacred, there are boundaries to your exploitation. If the river is just a machine, then the only limitation is your engineering budget. We replace reverence with arithmetic.
And the arithmetic is failing, which suggests that the river isn't just a resource, it's a mirror. It is reflecting our own psychological hubris right back at us.
It absolutely is. The Danube is arguably the greatest testing ground for human problem-solving on Earth. If you analyze how different factions approach the river today, you see classic human archetypes constantly running into the brick wall of natural reality.
The risk assessments break these subpersonalities down perfectly. Take the strategist or the builder archetype. This is the classic Army Corps of Engineers mindset.
Right. The builder looks at the chaotic, flooding river and says, I can fix this with enough concrete. They crave absolute deterministic control. They try to build the dam to maximize systems and the levee to dictate the flow.
But what the river constantly teaches the builder is that absolute control in a complex system is a fallacy. You cannot destroy energy, you only displace it. Unintended consequences always follow. Every single intervention the builder makes just shifts the vulnerability to a new, often more catastrophic failure point.
Then you have the caregiver archetype, the modern environmental advocate.
The sources outline their perspective too. The caregiver looks at the concrete channel and the dying sturgeon and says, we have to protect the downstream ecosystems. We have to breach the dams and let the floodplains recover.
Their intent is pure preservation, but they are instantly paralyzed by the brutal reality of systemic trade-offs.
Right, because if you breach the Iron Gate's dams to save the sturgeon, you suddenly eliminate a massive percentage of the renewable energy grid for millions of people in the Balkans.
And to replace that baseload power, those countries might have to burn more coal, which accelerates climate change, which kills the river anyway through drought.
There is no morally pure choice.
Exactly. And finally, you have the systems thinker, the technocrat who tries to manage the whole thing from a desk in Vienna or Brussels.
They are the ones trying to balance the builder and the caregiver.
Right. The systems thinker believes that if they can just collect enough data, they can calculate the exact flow rates and logistics needed to maintain shipping drafts while preserving minimum ecological baselines.
The mathematics might be flawless.
But the systems thinker is continually thwarted by the irrationality of human politics. You cannot run a perfectly optimized algorithm across 10 fiercely independent, fiercely nationalistic sovereign states that fundamentally distrust each other. International coordination is messy.
So what does this all mean? Synthesizing all of that, it seems the ultimate lesson of the Danube is one of forced humility. We project our desperate human desire for stability, borders, and permanence onto the map. We draw our hard lines and build our walls.
But the river is inherently dynamic, chaotic, and uncontrollable. We try to use the river to separate us from them, to find isolation through borders.
Right.
But the inescapable physics of the water mathematically connects us. It binds our survival to our neighbors.
It forces cooperation through the threat of mutual destruction, which leads us to look outward. If human nature is constantly clashing with this specific river, how does this massive 10-nation pressure cooker compare to the other great river systems of the world?
This is vital context.
Yeah, let's do a comparative global analysis. What makes the Danube the ultimate test of humanity? If I think about heavily engineered rivers, my mind immediately jumps to the Mississippi. How does the Danube compare to the American system?
Well, the Mississippi is a phenomenal feat of hydraulic engineering, easily rivaling the Danube in scale and modification. But structurally, it is fundamentally an internal national engineering problem.
Because it exists entirely within the borders of a single sovereign nation.
Right. The United States government, specifically the Army Corps of Engineers, has unilateral authority over the main stem. If they need to open a spillway or build a levee, they execute it. They don't have to convene an international summit with 10 different presidents, all wielding veto power just to dredge a sandbar.
Okay, what about the Nile?
The Nile is defined by profound centralized dependence. Historically, the predictability of its seasonal floods was the singular clock of Egyptian civilization.
And today?
Today, it is a massive geopolitical flashpoint over water scarcity, primarily between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. But it lacks the intense multipolar fragmentation of the Danube.
And the Amazon?
The Amazon remains defined by its sheer, unconquered biological scale, its massive wild natural dominance. Despite ongoing deforestation and localized damming, the main trunk of the river fundamentally commands the humans around it. It has not been domesticated into an industrial shipping pipe.
Which leaves the Yangtze in China.
The Yangtze is commanded by top-down, centralized state authority. The construction of the Three Gorges Dam is something that could only happen under an apparatus capable of unilaterally displacing millions of its own citizens to achieve a macro-engineering goal.
So when we look at the Danube globally, its defining characteristic isn't its length, its volume, or even its engineering. Its unique identity is its democratic, multipolar friction, its fragmentation and complexity.
Precisely. Because it crosses 10 nations, no single authority dominates. Every single decision, whether it's Austria setting a new pollution limit on agricultural nitrates, or Hungary altering the draft requirements for shipping barges, or Romania demanding more environmental flow through the Iron Gates, requires excruciating, exhausting international compromise.
No one holds absolute power. And that, right there, is exactly why you, listening to this, need to care deeply about the Danube, even if you never set foot in Europe. Because this river isn't just a geographic feature, it is a prototype for the survival of human civilization in the 21st century.
It really is.
As climate change accelerates, bringing hotter summers, erratic rainfall, and severe water scarcity to every corner of the globe, transboundary water conflicts are going to define the next 50 years.
We are going to see rivers drying up and causing tension across the American West, the Middle East, and Asia.
Exactly. And if these 10 nations along the Danube nations with deeply bloody historical baggage, massive economic disparities, and competing national interests can figure out how to adapt to a drying, stressed river system and share it without collapsing into total ecological death, they will provide the blueprint for the rest of the world.
It proves that multilateral cooperation under intense environmental stress is actually possible. The Danube is the living laboratory for our global future.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by taking that static, boring blue line on the map and ripping it up. We looked at the sheer kinetic force of the wild post-Ice Age corridor.
The braided river.
Right. We marched with the Romans who turned it into an imperial border. We examined the massive hubristic engineering of the modern machine, the locks pumping water over mountains, the straightened channels, and the dams that suffocate the ancient sturgeon.
And we decoded the hydropolitical asymmetry that allows the upstream nations to dictate the fate of the downstream populations, making it the most complex international resource puzzle on Earth.
And as we close this analysis, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Our sources really hammered this home.
Yeah, I think I know what you're going to say.
For the last 10,000 years, humanity's entire strategy has been to ruthlessly engineer the Danube River to fit human civilization. We straightened it, walled it, dammed it, and drained it.
But as water scarcity and climate stress push this rigid, unforgiving system to its absolute breaking point, we might be entering an era where we can no longer engineer the river.
Right. The river is finally going to force human civilization to re-engineer itself.
That is the ultimate paradigm shift.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you look at a map and your eye catches a jagged border, a concrete dam, or a river cutting across a continent, I hope you never just see a geographic feature again. See the kinetic energy, see the physics, see the struggle. Until next time.